the reaction to Donald Trump's election continues to escalate, particularly in the academic world. Dozens of colleges and universities are now making plans to become sanctuary campuses on which students who are in this country illegally will be protected by administrators from federal immigration authorities. One of the first schools to take this step is Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. Wesleyan's president, Michael Roth, joins us now. Dr. Roth, thanks for coming on. So
thank you for having me.
I read the various statements about this issued by the school and from you, and it seems like you're taking a stand on principle. You're opposed to this on every level. So my question is, if the Trump administration makes deportation its policy, will you give up the hundreds of millions that Wesleyan takes each year in taxpayer money?
It's a great question, and I wish it were hundreds of millions of dollars, Tucker, but it's not. But there would be.
According to your school newspaper, it's 200 million. It's 200 million a year.
Yes.
That's
well, you should source your. You remember what it's like to work on a school newspaper. So how much do you take in federal subsidies? We don't take year. Federal subsidies. We take research grants at about. It would be over $20 million.
Are you including Pell Grants in that? Including
Pell Grants. I am. You remember your time in Hartford. Wesleyan is a small school.
Yeah.
And we certainly hope it doesn't come to losing federal funding. What we have said, what we were going to do is not cooperate with what would have to be extrajuridical deportation proceedings. Because there's no way you could actually deport 10 million people in one or two administrations. So there would have to be extraordinary cooperation of all kinds of folks in society to deport people who have been living here for many years. And we've said we're not going to cooperate with that voluntarily. We will use the law to protect our students.
Okay. So, but what you're saying is that you disagree with the policy, perceived policy, anticipated policy of the Trump administration, so you won't be abiding by it. And my only point is, it's a little weird to say we're not going to follow federal directives, but at the same time, we're going to take federal money. It's a little bit like the rich kid denouncing his parents, but living in the guest house. A little bit, if it's a matter of principle for you.
No, it's not.
No, of course it's not. You want the moral posturing, but you want to keep the subsidy.
Do you want to ask me a question? Shall I go ahead? You know plenty of states that were against Obamacare that continue to take Medicaid funding, that continue to take money for roads. We're not declaring we're not going to abide by a policy, because there is no policy yet. What we've said is, given the rhetoric of mass deportation that was used in the campaign, we want to make clear that without warrants and subpoenas, we're not going to voluntarily cooperate with Border Patrol people. And that's within our rights, as we don't have to actually bow down before the federal government, as you and your listeners have always said, right? You don't want to have
I'm suggesting
now that you're in charge doesn't mean you can do what you want.
No, I'm suggesting abiding by federal law, and I do think you're sending sort of an odd message to your students, kind of an a la carte approach to to criminal justice or justice under the law. When you say we like this, we're going to abide by it. We don't like this, and we're not going to.
It's a really important point, and that is my biggest hesitation for taking the stand we took, was exactly that. We're not taking an a la carte approach to the law. What we are saying is that if we are asked to cooperate with the releasing information about our students who've been living in this country for a decade or 15 years, we're not going to do that without legal exigencies provided by Border Patrol officials. There is no way you could deport 10 million people legally through the court system within the next 10 years.
But you keep pointing that. I'm actually not talking about 10 million. I'm talking about Wesleyan. Right. Okay, so here I want to quote you now. You're saying these are small steps, to be sure, I'm quoting you, in the face of a very frightening wave of threats to roll back the civil rights gains made in recent decades. Is there a civil right to enter the United States illegally and be educated at public expense? Is that a new civil right, would you say? And does that right apply to all, say, 8 billion people in the world?
Of course not.
Then what are you talking about?
Well, there has been throughout the campaign threats to roll back advances for voting rights for African Americans, for rights for
Which rights for African Americans?
Excuse me? To vote.
Which rights for African Americans?
Voting rights for African Americans. It's very clear that voting restrictions in several states were surgically, I think I'm quoting now, surgically developed to keep black people from voting. So what I've said,
so Donald Trump has threatened to remove. No, hold on. You made the allegation. I just want you to explain it, if you would. You're saying that Donald Trump said that he will, if elected president, reduce the voting rights for black Americans? I mean, that didn't happen.
As you quoted me, what I said is that there is a great threat to roll back civil rights gains of recent decades. And you can see that, that in the rhetoric of the campaign. And what we have said is that we will not cooperate unless forced to through warrants and subpoenas with federal efforts to
but with respect,
mass
Doctor, hold on. You just made a specific allegation, and I think it's fair to ask you to back it up. You said that rhetoric during the campaign, presumably from the Trump campaign, included abridging the voting rights of African Americans, specifically African Americans. And I'm just asking you to cite that. What are you talking about?
So in Texas and North Carolina, there have been real efforts to roll back the voting rights legislation of recent decades and to keep people from the polls. And whether that means restricting early voting, whether that means making it harder for people to get to the polls, having fewer polling stations. I'm also referring to the very explicit
Those aren't
efforts
race
to roll
specific.
back.
I mean, look. People respect you as a scholar and a university president, and you're throwing around a lot of intemperate rhetoric that you can't back up. I mean, there was no specific effort. I don't know what I don't know what you're talking about, and I think it's unhelpful to make that allegation. But let me just say, finally, you said here, and I'm quoting, "Now, like so many around the country, I find myself wondering whether I should have done more to prevent the election of Donald Trump." And I'm wondering what you mean. What could you, as the president of a liberal arts college or university in Connecticut, have done to prevent the election of Donald Trump?
What I could have done was to ensure that students at Wesleyan who were on the right or the left turned their attention more to national politics. I do think that what I was getting at in that op-ed was that I feel that many of our students on college campuses are being more political now after the election than they were before, that they didn't engage in the political system. And the fact is, right now, we have a new administration coming to power, and I think it's important for us to take stands of principle, not to choose a la carte what laws we're going to obey, but to articulate our principles and to do our best to participate in the public political process. And I think many of our students advocated that responsibility.
But you say here you wish you'd done more to keep Trump from getting elected. I mean, that's something that a political consultant would say. You're a university president. Do you really see your job as that partisan to prevent a specific candidate from getting elected?
My job as but I am a citizen as well, and I think I could have done more as a citizen, not as a university president. I also said in the same piece
that's not what you say here. You say like many university people.
I do say that. I do say that in the piece that I don't think it's the role of a university president to design the politics of the campus. I think a university campus has to have room for conservatives, for people of faith, for atheists, for people on all sides of the political spectrum. And I do think it's important for a president not to hide his or her political views, but to make sure that everybody's political views get a fair hearing on the campus. And that, as you know, that doesn't always happen. And I do think it's really important that it happens.
I'm quoting now, and you say this as the university president. You wish more people would, quote, condemn his campaign of hate-filled demagoguery. That doesn't sound like someone who is allowing room for alternate points of view at all.
Well, I think taking a point of view does not diminish the possibility for other people to take points of view.
Okay.
I just met
I'm
yesterday
totally losing track of your position, but I appreciate you coming out, Dr. Roth. Yeah, I am, actually, because you sound like
Thank you for making room for other points of view, too.
Well, I am. That's why I wanted you to come on. I'm glad that you did.
That's why I thanked you. That's why I thanked you.
Thanks, Doctor. Great to see you.
Fatality. Taking on a bigger and bigger role, realizing that he's going to have a lot to focus on with the administration and running a government and trying to enact his legislative agenda, instead of, as Donald Trump himself told the New York Times, I'm not going to be worried about hotel occupancy rates. That's the last thing he wants to be doing.
People are outraged here that he criticized wind farms, which I think is the best thing he's ever said. They're awful.
I knew you would love that.
I really did. It's great to see you, Ed.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Well, and from our hysteria file tonight, some of our older viewers may dimly remember a person called Christiane Amanpour over at the cable news network, CNN. The other night, she gave a speech to a group of journalists in New York claiming that under a Donald Trump administration, reporters may have to fear for their physical safety. Some may wind up even, and brace yourselves, in cages like POWs in Vietnam. In Amanpour's world, that absolutely could happen, like tomorrow. Literally, fascism has come to America. Be very afraid.
is completely rigged. The fix is in. It's an inside game, and only people who are players in the game get its benefits. And this proves they're absolutely right. Trump is making this point. I think this helps Trump.
You might be right. So where do these Bernie voters go? If Tim Kaine is not exciting and it angers them, do they stay home on Election Day, or do they come out?
And now that marijuana has been decriminalized in most states, I mean, it doesn't, you know what I mean? It doesn't make it more likely they're going to vote.
That's right.
All right, 7 minutes after the hour, and we've got a big show lined up for you coming up on the program. No link to ISIS.
We've got some burners over here. What is up? Tell me.
Man, you know what, Bernie, that's what we need right now. Yeah, I mean, like, if you get people, like, fresh needles and stuff, like, I don't know, like, right. I mean, it's,
free education, free healthcare, and free needles. That's our platform.
Yeah, feel the burn!
Literally. Fidel Castro, he passed on Friday. He ruled Cuba by force and by cult of personality for nearly 50 years. His death, of course, was greeted with rejoicing by the thousands who fled his island prison. But on the academic left, the response was more muted, even bittersweet. Some even seemed to mourn him. Now, what could you possibly say that's positive about a man like Fidel Castro? Joining us now to tell us is Renee de la Parraja, a professor at Canisius College. Professor, thanks a lot for joining us tonight. So I've heard many on the left say, well, he raised literacy rates and he trained a bunch of doctors. But from my perspective as an American, as a human, this is a guy who imprisoned people who criticized him and wouldn't allow his citizens to leave the country, thereby turning the entire island into a prison. So why would literacy rates mean anything in the face of human rights abuses like that?
Well, now, but let me correct you briefly, Tucker. Now Cubans can leave anytime they want the island. They just have to find a country that will receive them with visas. Now, the burden is on the other side there.
Okay, I mean for the past 50 years.
Yeah, okay, you want to go at the earlier period.
Flee the island. Right, yeah, for the 50 years.
Yeah.
That period.
Put yourself in the place of the Cuban government. They spend a lot of money educating a doctor. And then when he's ready to practice, well, I'll just go to the U.S. and earn those high salaries there. So you can see this attempt to restrict. There were some economic reasons for that. It was not just that it was
come on, Professor. Why are you making? Look, that's monstrous. He put people in prison for criticizing him. He sent, as you know, a lot of his doctors, an awful lot, to places like Angola and Venezuela to help other revolutions in progress. There's no excuse for that. And here's my meta question. Why does the left make excuses for a monster like Fidel Castro? Why?
Because he's become a symbol, not just in Cuba, but throughout the world there for people who, believe it or not, are seeking freedom, are seeking opportunities. Remember, he abolished segregation in Cuba. Nobody mentions that there. He supported nationalist movements across the world there in an age where there were colonies and empires. So that made him very attractive to a lot of people. Now, for me, it's difficult to say this there because I'm really not the extreme left. All my life, I've been caught between those who hate Castro and those who worship him. And all my life, I've been trying to kind of bring a little bit of the Cuban people together there. So it doesn't hurt anything to recognize. Yes,
but there's some figures, Professor, who are just clarifying. Again, if you put dissidents in prison, if people are afraid to speak your name in public, if your secret police keeps order, as his did, I don't think any of those facts are up for dispute. How could anything about him be good? How could anything about him be good?
You're forgetting the factor that the United States has been trying to overthrow Castro since August of 1959. So this has made the government very paranoid there. We try to assassinate him. We try to do all these horrible things to him. And so this allowed him to tap into nationalism there. So that you keep that in mind there. It's the U.S. government behind all this.
Right, of course. So basically what he tapped into was international hatred of the United States. And you know the truth, which is nobody would defend Castro if he didn't hate the United States, if he didn't set himself up in opposition to the U.S. If he was pro-U.S., you would not defend him. But leaving that aside,
the United States tried to assassinate him, Tucker. I mean, how can you, they try to kill him there. They try to overthrow him like they had done in Guatemala in 1954. So the survival instincts kicked in there, and he had to find allies who will help him.
No, but that is silly. Guatemala didn't, as you know, become a totalitarian dictatorship. Cuba did, and it served his interests and not the interests of the people on the island. Their health care survey, would you go there for a bypass? No, of course not.
Well, people do fly to Cuba for operations because it's cheaper there. Let me inform you, they go from the Dominican Republic. Okay. They go from different parts of Latin America because they have such great health service. We just made our arrangements here with the Roswell Cancer Institute. They have all this new discoveries, a vaccine for lung cancer. We have not been able to develop that there. So the investments in medicine,
they had full employment after Weimar, but that's really kind of not the point. I mean, look, if you allowed everyone in Cuba who wanted to leave, over the last 50 years,
they can leave right now. They have to find a country that will receive them.
That's, as you know, a recent development. People risked their lives and in many cases died to flee. Does that not tell you something? Why is it only people in sinecures like yours, affluent, protected people in Western countries where they can speak their minds, who defend this guy? I've never met anybody who fled from Cuba who would defend him.
Because, well, the ones who have fled for a number of reasons, sometimes for personal reasons. They left their wives behind. They want to start a new life with a new wife, forget about the old family. You don't hear about that in the media there. And nationalism, the Cuban nationalism,
so you're saying that people who fled Castro were abandoning their families?
Some of them,
because they had like a girlfriend.
Want to begin a new life there. Some of them were. So there's not this huge system of political oppression that is very popular among certain sectors there. Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of popular participation in Cuba there. I mean, you're only seeing one. I'm glad you have me a few minutes there to hear some of these things. There's another side to the picture there, and I think your viewers have a right to hear that there. It's not this brutal regime.
They've been hearing it for decades. The Cold War is over.
The Cold War has been over for 20 years.
It's not about the Cold War. It's about the impulse on the left to defend totalitarianism. And it makes me nervous as an American because these are my fellow citizens who claim to value free speech, and yet they defend this guy. So it just tells you everything about how they really feel.
The more we reach out to Cuba, the more they'll open up there. They've been opening up some other communications, more movements there. And the more we attack them, the more they close in there. So I know this is unpopular
I noticed the obvious.
some people.
I didn't ask the obvious question, Professor, which is, Cuba's so great, why didn't you move there? Why are you in a tenured profession in the United States? But unfortunately, we're out of time. I guess the answer is obvious. It's that hole, and no one would want to move there. Thanks a lot for joining us.
I disagree with you. Yeah, my pleasure.
Well, you're still here, so obviously you don't.
All right, look, we appreciate you coming on. We know how busy you are.
I'm loving it. No, I don't get tired. It's lovely, right? High energy.